Namaste everyone, it's Chris with Ninth Limb, and I wanted to talk about backbending and why it's an obstacle for a lot of people and the benefits of doing some backbending. What happens early on in your yoga practice when you try to do backbending is a sensation of almost anxiety. It's difficult to breathe, and this has several reasons. A lot of it has to do with the musculature in between the ribs called the intercostals. A lot of those are rigid and tight. Based on a lifetime of a certain kind of breathing, even in athletes that breathe a lot. Like I was a wrestler, and so I had really strong intercostals, but there's a lot of guarding and protecting the ribs in wrestling. So loosening those up, allowing the ribs to spread apart and expand, was a very intense endeavor. Also in more active backbending, like in drop backs or camel pose, or using a wall or a back bridge or something like that, a lot of times the musculature of the hip complex and the lower lumbar spine is not developed in a way that can do those sorts of things. And again, it's not necessarily your fault, it's a kind of awkward position. Not a lot of animals in nature do backbending other than just monkeys might throw their arms up and stretch, but they're not like doing back wheels and things like that. So even if you're super active in hip flexing, let's say you're a bicyclist or a runner, or just about any athletic endeavor is going to strengthen your hip flexors. That hip flexors bring your legs up and forward. A lot of times they're just not coordinated and they're not loose enough to find strength in elongation. A lot of times if you go beyond a certain range, the muscle won't fire. And so a lot of times we're stretching, and the sensation of stretching is a contraction during elongation. So there's a distinction to be made between elongating a muscle and stretching a muscle. Stretching specifically is referring to the sensation of what we know as a stretch, which is really a contraction while elongating. That sensation is very much related to nerves, and by stimulating the nerves in a way that's not an overload, that's why we don't want sharp shooting pains, we don't want spasms while we're elongating the muscle. It might tremble a little bit, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but spasms, you want to lighten up on it. But in that sensation of stretching is allowing you to actually recruit more of the muscle fibers. So especially in the lower back, just your lifestyle is sitting, even if you're something that's standing, you were an athlete standing or you're on your feet a lot, that doesn't necessarily mean you have access to those muscles when you're in extension. So it takes time. You go slow at the beginning, don't go super intense in the back bends. Another feature of backbending, just as a injury prevention, is, like for me, for example, I drive a lot, and driving is mostly with the right foot in America. I don't know, you might be watching this somewhere else, but it's asymmetric. And so as you go back, you have these two hip flexor muscles that are on either side of your spine that go from the lower spine down onto the thighs, and that's what lifts the legs. They don't run parallel, they're kind of like this. But a lot of times, because let's say I'm using my right leg a lot more in using the gas pedal and the brake pedal, my right hip flexor is developed differently than my left. As I do a symmetric back bend, that asymmetry and the tension of those muscles will twist the spine. And so that's not a good thing, because that'll twist the pelvis also. So just having awareness, not going to your maximum until you develop the awareness of, is my left side pulling harder than my right, or so on. So basically the takeaways, the keys: go gentle. You don't have to go to your deepest expression of a back bend when you start doing yoga. Taper into it with consistent, regular practice, 2, 3, or more times a week. I used to do 6 times a week, 7 times a week if I was feeling really sprightly. You'll develop that awareness. You'll also slowly in time develop the strength for the stability around that lower lumbar and pelvis complex. There's a lot of joints going on there. And also just be aware of what's happening with the chest. So there's tight intercostals, there's a lot of other type and lesser developed muscles, especially on the front of the scapula, the anterior, so that's between the scapula and the rib cage. A lot of those are less developed, especially when compared with the other muscles of the shoulder complex, like the chest muscles or the lats. So backbending is a lot of engaging the front of the scapula and elongating the intercostals, both of which can induce a sort of panic or a sort of anxiety. You could think of the front of the scapula as touching the rib cage. It's right behind the lungs, behind the heart. So it's a very intimate place to be feeling engagement. So just being aware that that is the process. It is the process to go through that kind of difficulty breathing in back bends, difficulty engaging in back bends, trembling. There's a pose called the locust pose, where you lift you're on your belly, you lift your chest, and you lift your legs. I used to hate that pose so much. I dreaded it. I couldn't wait until the poses after it. And now it's one of my favorite poses of all time. It's just so healing, and such little movement is required, but yet recruits a lot of effort. And that effort, when it's pointed and focused and combines with a lot of knowledge and awareness, can be very, very healing movement. So I love Cobra Pose now. And that's the story I hear from a lot of students is, I used to hate back bends, and now I love back bends, and so on. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this gave you some insight. If it did, comment below, or if you have any other questions about back bending. On August 15th, my Ashtanga Primary Series Pranayama course is coming out. This is from the BNS Iyengar lineage. To be able to learn this for yourself, you need to find an authorized teacher such as myself, or travel to India yourself and study with BNS for a month, which costs a lot more than what I'll be exchanging this product for. You would go to ninthlimb.com where it will be available, and more on that coming up. So hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Namaste. Chris out.